Come on, give me a hand, will you, Ethel?
What's the matter? Can't you handle it by yourself?
No, I can't handle it.
They played a married couple so convincingly that 50 million Americans watched them every week and never once suspected the truth. Vivien Vance and William Frawley, the actors behind Ethel and Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, despised each other with a depth and consistency that shocked everyone who witnessed it firsthand. And the story of why that hatred took root and never let go is one of the most compelling chapters in the entire history of American television. Vivian Roberta Jones came into the world on July 26, 1909, in Cherryville, Kansas, the second of 6 children born into a household that had very little patience for her ambitions. Even as a child, performing pulled at her the way it pulls at certain people from the very beginning, not as a choice, but as a compulsion. She sang, she acted in school productions, she threw herself into local performances with an intensity that her mother found embarrassing and impractical. That disapproval was never quiet or gentle. Her mother held the firm conviction that the stage was no place for a respectable young woman, and she communicated that belief often enough that Vivian spent her early years learning how to want something that the people closest to her refused to support. None of that stopped her. By her early 20s, she had relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she began training seriously and taking on work in the regional theater, building her craft piece by piece in productions that most of the country would never see. Albuquerque was a beginning, not a destination, and she understood that. New York City was where she needed to be, and eventually she got there, carving out a genuine career on Broadway through the 1930s and 1940s in productions that showcased a performer with real range, sharp comic instincts, and a voice that suited musical theater. None of it made her famous in the way she wanted, but it made her good, and that mattered more than she sometimes got credit for. The role that changed everything arrived not through careful industry navigation, but through the instinct of one woman who trusted what she saw. Lucille Ball, already one of the most powerful forces in early television, needed someone to play Ethel Mertz, the loyal and sharp-tongued neighbor at the center of I Love Lucy. The character had to be funny without being ridiculous, grounded without being dull, and strong enough to hold her own in scenes opposite a performer as electric as Lucille Ball. When Ball met Vivien Vance, the decision formed quickly. Others raised objections, arguing that Vance might be too polished, too young, not quite the right fit. Ball dismissed every one of those objections and insisted on casting her anyway. That choice would prove to be one of the most inspired decisions in the history of the medium. I Love Lucy premiered in 1951, and what audiences responded to was not just Lucille Ball's extraordinary physical comedy, but the friendship at the heart of the show. The relationship between Lucy Ricardo and Ethel Mertz carried the series through its best moments, 2 women bound together by loyalty, absurdity, and an unspoken understanding that they needed each other to survive whatever scheme was currently unraveling around them. Vivian gave Ethel a texture that the character could easily have lacked, making her funny without sacrificing her dignity, practical without draining her of warmth, and lovable in a way that felt completely unforced. Week after week, audiences trusted Ethel because Vivian made her trustworthy. The friendship between Vivien Vance and Lucille Ball was genuine, and that genuineness translated directly onto the screen. They trusted each other off-screen, supported each other through the grinding demands of production, and built a chemistry in their scenes together that no amount of directing could have manufactured. What viewers were responding to was real, and they knew it even if they couldn't name it. That authenticity gave I Love Lucy an emotional foundation that kept audiences returning season after season. Behind all of that success, though, Vivian's private life carried a weight that her performances never revealed. 4 marriages, most of them painful, left her emotionally exhausted in ways she rarely discussed publicly. Depression followed her throughout her life, a condition that received almost no serious attention during that era, and the relentless pressure of fame and production schedules pushed against an interior life that was already strained. None of that showed on camera. Every scene she delivered was precise and alive, which is its own kind of testament to the discipline she carried into every working day. What troubled her, as much as anything, though, was what playing Ethel Mertz was quietly doing to her public image. Ethel was written as a frumpy, middle-aged housewife, unfashionable and unglamorous by design, the practical friend who existed largely to react to the star. Vivian was in her early 40s when filming began, which already placed her at a disadvantage in an industry that treated actresses over 30 as a depreciating asset. Being consistently styled down, dressed plainly, and written as someone's ordinary wife accelerated a process of image erosion that she watched happening and could not stop. The public began to see no separation between Vivien Vance and Ethel Mertz, and that confusion, she feared, would define how the industry perceived her for the rest of her career. She was right to fear it. William Clement Frawley was born on February 26, 1887, in Burlington, Iowa, which put more than 20 years between him and the woman who would become his most famous co-star and his most enduring enemy. Burlington was a working-class Irish Catholic town, and Frawley grew up in it with the rough edges that environment tends to produce, direct and unsentimental, quick to take offense and slow to forget it. Before show business claimed him, he worked as a court reporter and stenographer, ordinary jobs that gave no indication of where his life was heading. Vaudeville found him in his early 20s, and that world suited him precisely. He performed comedy and song, developed a timing that was naturally combative and sharply funny, and briefly partnered with and married a pianist named Edna Louise Brote in 1914, a union that dissolved without producing any lasting sentiment on either side. Broadway came next, then Hollywood in the early 1930s, where Frawley built a career as one of the most reliable character actors working in American film. Over 100 movies carried his name in the credits, including Miracle on 34th Street, where he played a political advisor, and Going My Way alongside Bing Crosby. The lead roles almost never went to him, but he possessed the rare ability to walk into any scene and make it feel more inhabited, more real, more worth watching. Studios valued that quality, and for years they used it consistently. The drinking, though, was always there. Frawley's alcohol problem had shadowed him through decades of professional life, generating stories about missed calls and erratic behavior, and a temper that became genuinely dangerous when combined with whatever he had consumed the night before. By the late 1940s, and several studios had simply stopped hiring him, deciding that his talent was no longer worth the disruption his habits created. His career had slowed to a near stop, and the industry had largely moved on from him when I Love Lucy presented itself as one final opening. Desi Arnaz heard from Frawley directly. He reached out, asked for the role of Fred Mertz, the penny-pinching and perpetually irritated landlord married to Ethel, and Arnaz agreed to consider him on one non-negotiable condition: one missed day, one appearance on set showing any sign of drinking, and the job was gone permanently. Frawley accepted and then did something that surprised nearly everyone involved by actually following through. He showed up, he knew his lines, and he stayed professional throughout the entire run of the show. Fred Mertz became one of the most recognized characters in the early history of television, and Frawley earned that recognition through work that was disciplined and precise and often genuinely brilliant. When I Love Lucy began production, Vivien Vance and William Frawley arrived on set as strangers with no history between them. The first few weeks passed without any serious incident, and by some accounts they were civil enough that a working relationship seemed possible. That changed when a comment Vivien made, or was reported to have made, found its way back to Frawley through the narrow channels of a television set where nothing stays private for long. The age gap between them was 22 years, which nobody involved in the production had thought to address in any meaningful way. Vivien was in her early 40s. Frawley was in his mid-60s. The scripts treated Fred and Ethel as a couple of similar vintage, long married and contemporaneous, with no acknowledgement of the gap that was visually obvious to anyone looking at them together. Vivien found this hard to accept, and she reportedly said that no one would believe she was married to someone who looked that old. When those words reached Frawley, the damage was immediate and lasting. He had a short temper under the best of conditions, and being described in those terms by a younger actress whose value he had already questioned, cut deep enough that he never stopped feeling it. From that point, the relationship moved in one direction. Frawley began making dismissive comments about Vance openly, criticizing her singing, her dancing, the way she sometimes offered suggestions during musical numbers, which he read as overstepping by someone who hadn't earned the right to redirect anyone. His complaints about her weren't quiet or private. They circulated through the crew and reached Vivien regularly, and she responded with a consistency that matched his. The nickname Old Fat Freddy started appearing in backstage conversations, and Frawley returned fire with insults about her appearance that were specific enough to sting and mean enough to confirm that whatever had started as professional friction had become something considerably uglier. What the writers discovered, and quietly began to use, was that the genuine hostility between their two supporting actors made Fred and Ethel's on-screen bickering feel more textured and alive than it might have otherwise. Lines that allowed Fred to needle Ethel about her figure or her cooking landed with a sharpness that audiences read as perfect marital comedy, completely unaware that the delivery carried real feeling. The eye rolls, the cutting asides, the barely contained impatience that Fred and Ethel directed at each other week after week drew directly from a well of actual contempt that never ran dry. Viewers thought they were watching two gifted performers pretending to be annoyed. They were watching two gifted performers who actually were. When the original series wrapped in 1957, the studio looked at what they had and considered extending it. A spin-off built around Fred and Ethel Mertz made commercial sense on paper. The characters were popular, the audience was loyal, and there was enough history between them to sustain a new show. Yet Frawley wanted it. He liked the work, he liked the character, and he had no objection to continuing in any form the studio might offer. Vivien turned it down without deliberation. She wasn't going to extend the years she spent being dressed down and typed as a middle-aged frumpy sidekick, and she certainly wasn't going to do it alongside a man she despised, regardless of the money the offer carried. Frawley's reaction to that refusal never softened. He believed she had killed something valuable out of nothing but spite, that she had used her influence to deny him an opportunity he deserved, and he held on to that belief with the same grip he brought to everything he resented. Years later, while working on My Three Sons, the family sitcom he joined in 1960 playing the grandfather and caretaker Bob Casey, a visiting dignitary asked him what Vivien Vance was really like. His answer came without pause, a single crude insult delivered in front of people who were visibly startled by it. The anecdote spread through the industry afterward because it said something precise and unambiguous about the state of things between them. Time had resolved nothing. My Three Sons gave Frawley 5 more seasons of steady work, but his health spent those years declining steadily beneath the surface. The decades of drinking and the accumulated wear of age made themselves felt in ways the show eventually couldn't accommodate. Lines slipped, movement slowed, fatigue became harder to conceal. In 1965, he left the series for health reasons and was replaced by William Demarest. On March 3, 1966, 1 week after his 79th birthday, Frawley collapsed on a Hollywood sidewalk after watching a movie at a neighborhood theater. He was carried to a hospital and pronounced dead shortly after from a heart attack. News of his death reached Vivien at a dinner party. According to the people present, she raised her glass and called for champagne for everyone. Whether every detail of that story survived the retelling intact or picked up some embellishment along the way, it reflects something accurate about who she was and what she felt at that moment. No public tribute followed. No gracious statement appeared in the press. No indication surfaced that she considered his death something to mourn, and, given the years of abuse she had absorbed from him, her silence on the subject was its own kind of statement. Vivien continued working after I Love Lucy, appearing on The Lucy Show for several seasons, and taking guest roles where she could find them. But Ethel Mertz followed her everywhere she went. Casting directors and producers saw the character when they looked at her and offered her versions of it repeatedly, which was exactly the trap she had been trying to escape since the early years of the original series. The dramatic work she wanted, the return to serious stage performance she had imagined for herself, never materialized in the way she had hoped. She moved to Connecticut with her 4th husband, John Dodds, and built a quieter life away from the industry that had made her famous and in the same motion limited her. Breast cancer came in the late 1970s, and she died in 1979 at 70 years old, leaving behind a career that was simultaneously one of the great success stories in television history, and a source of private frustration she never fully resolved. What Vivien Vance and William Frawley built together across 6 seasons of I Love Lucy stands as one of the most enduring achievements in the history of American television comedy. The show changed how television was produced, how studios thought about audience loyalty, and how the medium understood its own potential. Fred and Ethel Mertz were not incidental to that achievement. Their marriage, their bickering, their specific and completely believable dynamic as 2 people who had spent decades wearing each other down and couldn't imagine life without each other, gave the show a grounded reality that balanced Lucy Ricardo's wilder flights. And the fact that all of it was built on a foundation of genuine mutual contempt is one of the stranger and more instructive stories that classic television has to offer. Proof that great performances don't require the performers to like each other, only to be skilled enough to make you believe they do.